If you, like me, have had your head somewhat on a swivel the last 24 to 48 hours with the fire hose of news coming out of the PGA Tour world, then hopefully these next few minutes will help sort things out as I'm joined by my friend Ryan Ballengee from Golf News Net. And Ryan, it is rapid fire coming out of the tour world, coming out of players only meetings. It looks like Tiger and Rory are trying to reinvent holy moly on a bigger scale. And money is flying like it's one of those booths in the 1980s radio promotions where they would put somebody in an air-filled phone booth and let them grab whatever cash
The
they could.
hurricane.
Yes, exactly. So let me start off our conversation by asking what your first impression is of what has happened.
I mean, this is a seemingly a somewhat radical transformation of the PGA Tour in a way that acknowledges what was kind of already there, if that makes sense. That this idea of elevated events and the top players committing to compete in those events on one hand sounds radical and transformational, but in reality, that's how the PGA Tour worked for the last 20 years, where we had the Tiger Tour back in the day when all the events that Tiger played in were the big events and all the other events weren't, more or less. I mean, that's not entirely true, but more or less. But now we've got these 20 guys as assigned by the Player Impact Program. And those 20 guys are basically the remaining superstars of the PGA Tour. And they've all agreed to commit to play in the same, more or less, 17 tournaments and then sprinkle in another 3 between the FedEx Cup season so that there are at least about 12.5 times a year we're practically guaranteed to see the top 20 players in the world. Well, that already kind of happens. So there's a codification of that's helpful. The money involved obviously has gone up, but I think that's more of a cementing for these players who consider themselves individual businesses, that they're going to agree to kind of work together in their common interests a little bit more often than maybe they had in the past.
And as 125 independent corporations out there, I guess somebody had to sort of try to herd the cats. And I mean, nobody's making any qualms about the fact that Liv motivated these conversations, but the tour has always been run by the players. I'm just not sure the players always understood that. It seemed like, you would hear comments when guys would defect to Liv. You'd hear comments from the geniuses of the world, like Patrick Reed, saying, well, if the tour, and Brooks Koepka, if the tour would just listen to us. And there were a few voices that were pushing back and saying, you do realize you guys, you do make the policies. I'm not sure they did realize that, to be honest with you. It sounded like they were mad at an employer when they were the employer.
However, yeah, that's a really interesting way of putting it.
Well, I mean, they were in charge. So
right. They still are. I mean, the players are still in charge. It's still a 501c6 member-driven organization. So at the end of the day, and I've heard some other players comment about this, to what you're saying, if you want change, then you have to stand up and fight for it, because there are 200 plus people who have PGA Tour status of some kind and more than 150 who have voting rights. So if you want to institute change, you have to organize it. You have to make a case for it, and then you have to get it implemented. And it's not very easy to organize that many people who have different values, who have different goals. And a lot of professional golfers, and I'll give credit to the No Laying Up guys who spoke with Keith Mitchell as a PAC member, Policy Advisory Council member, who said that they don't know the first thing about what they're talking about from a technical standpoint. They don't know what a 501c6 means to them. They don't know what certain changes to the tour's policy might mean for their wallets and their bank accounts. They don't really know. They just know they want something different. And that changes how a lot of guys think about it, just that let someone else do it.
So yeah,
focus on golf and let someone else do it.
Some of those guys remind me of the Seinfeld episode where Kramer's trying to tell Jerry just to write off his damaged stereo, and Jerry goes, I don't even think you know what a write-off is. And he says, I don't have to. They're the ones writing it off. And that's, it seems like maybe Kramer's been advising some of those guys. And I wonder, and I doubt we'll ever know this, but I kind of wonder if over in Live Land, there might be a few regretful mornings on behalf of some of those who who did make the change. And yeah, theoretically, they got big cash and deposits made up front, although I'm not entirely convinced that's happened. And I'm wondering if a couple are having buyer's remorse.
I mean, you have to think that some of the players, particularly the younger ones, I mean, let's sort out maybe Sergio and older
Well,
players.
let me take an example for you, because from Michigan was, until last weekend, the reigning U.S. amateur champion, James Pyatt. A wonderful young man. I've had the chance to interview him on a number of occasions, and he took the money and ran. And I don't wish ill on him. I think he's a great kid. I think he made a poor decision. And I wonder if someone like that, who had always dreamed of a PGA Tour career, woke up today going, oh, crap. Why couldn't they have done this 3 months ago?
On one hand, yes, right? I think if you are one of those older players or even a younger player who hasn't achieved this level of stardom yet, I wonder what they are thinking because they haven't gotten there yet. That they wouldn't have been included in this expanded PIP program, which is now 20 players and $100 million instead of 10 players and $50 million. And oh, by the way, they just made that $50 million appear today. It wasn't, it's not for next year. It happened today. So if you're not already in that company, do you feel like you are missing out on a potential opportunity for yourself, which is probably how I would think about it? Or are you thinking, I wasn't in that company anyhow, so I wouldn't have benefited? But if you're a player, maybe you like a James Pyatt, who, I mean, he's a great player, obviously won a US Am, but not every great amateur player or great collegiate player turns into a great professional player. So being able to get to the PGA Tour and establish that $500,000 floor for your earnings, that might have been something that appeals to someone like that no matter what, you had the security that you're going to at least probably break even on your year after you pay everybody involved in your mini business that is running your life on the PGA Tour. So I don't know that everyone's, will wake up and go, oh, that could have been me.
Yeah.
Because they haven't gotten there yet.
So I can't quite settle yet on how I feel about the change to the foundational ethos of being a PGA Tour pro from a financial standpoint. And I say that knowing that we live and operate and root in a world of exorbitant salaries for professional athletes. And I know that the 220 hitting shortstop is still making $7 million a year, no matter what. And he's playing for my Tigers, and they're horrendous. Actually, in our case, that shortstop's making $30 million a year, and he's hitting 210, but I digress. And so I've always had this somewhat antiquated affection for the idea that if you don't play well, you're not getting paid. You're out of your own pocket for your airfare, your hotel, your caddy, your entry fees, and life. I'm sorry, it sucks to be you. If you don't like it, go sell insurance like Chip Beck had to do for a while, right? So I've always liked that, but it was never me. It was, I've always liked that pressure on other people. And so when we hear things about the $500,000 up front, you're going to work it off, but at least it's there. You hear things about the stipend of $5,000 for a missed cut to cover your travel and that kind of thing. It makes perfect sense. And for some reason, I took great pleasure in golf not being like all the other sports. Again, I don't even know if that's appropriate or proper, but that's just one of the things that drew me to the professional game. Did that get tarnished in all of this?
Maybe in name, but I don't think in actual practice. Because if you go down the PGA Tour money list, you'd have to get into like the 170s before you found a player who didn't earn $500,000 inside the ropes last year or this season. So the PGA Tour, and Jay Monahan mentioned this in his news conference announcing all this stuff, this initiative really only costs them $2 to $3 million a year, which is next to nothing for them. It's really not that much of a commitment. So this is really more for players who maybe get injured or have some kind of catastrophic event in their year. But otherwise, you're probably gonna earn $500,000 just being out there 30 events. I mean, that's basically last place cut money 30 times over the course of a year. So, okay, I mean, yeah, but you're probably going to finish better than dead last in the weekend more often than that and make enough money to get over that 500K. So it's more of an insurance policy than a bribe or an upfront payment. So yeah, it kind of sounds like, hey, these guys don't have to work as hard anymore. They're getting 500K guaranteed, but they kind of were anyhow. And with the purses going up because of the TV contract, you're going to find it even more difficult to not make $500,000 being a tour player.
I spent a good portion of yesterday on the range at the Ally Challenge, the PGA Tour Champions event, and the guys were out hitting balls before the Pro-Am, and it's a good relaxed setting. And you're able to stand close enough to hear them talking to each other while I'm waiting to talk to them. And I'm listening to three players because that news was just coming out as they were hitting balls, and they were following it on their phones, and you could see head shakes and you could see chuckles. You could hear chuckles. And they didn't know what to make of it. These are guys who had all come up through the system, all paid their dues, and now pretty thankful to have a gig. Champions Tour is playing for a decent amount of money. It's not life-changing, but it's decent. So I got a chance to ask a couple of them afterwards. So, what are you making of all this as we're all digesting it at the same time? And of course, they can't fathom where the money came from because they had never pressed the issue when they were on the regular tour to go find the money. So when we start hearing about these monopoly dollars flying about, I think one of the questions that probably should be asked. It's sort of like the questions that are asked when they announce the student loan forgiveness. You're like, hey, by the way, who's going to pay for that? And at a federal level, they're like, it's just going to be fine. Just take our word for it. And when you ask Monahan, where did all the money come from? It kind of feels like, well, I landed on free parking, and all the I don't really know if there's an answer to where it came from, other than maybe Phil had some of that right, in that the tour was sitting on a boatload of cash.
I'm not convinced Phil was right, and here's the reason why. I mean, you could say Phil had a significant influence. I don't want to disassociate the influence piece of this. It's probably pretty important. But the PGA Tour's television contract effectively quadrupled the amount of money they had coming in the door every year. So there's your found money. I mean, if I told you we were going to quadruple your salary, you might be able to give a whole lot more to charity because you have 4 times the money to do so. Not to say that paying guys a minimum is charity, but just thinking what you would do with your money. So now Monahan says, okay, well, we've got a much larger budget. We can go to our sponsors who have, many of them have been long, steadfast supporters of the tour and probably don't want to lose out to the Saudis, and go to them and say, hey, we just need a couple extra $1 million to make these top players happy. Can you do that for us for 5 years? And most of them are going to say, yeah, sure, we'll do that, because they are also enormous companies with billion-dollar balance sheets. So it all the money was going to be there. I think what Phil managed to accomplish was to accelerate the presentation of that money and maybe manipulate the way it was presented. Because I don't think if Live had never happened, I'm not necessarily convinced all these players would have gotten together as quickly as they have.
I agree.
Is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
But some of this was starting to happen because you kind of got the sense at the majors in particular, you would hear players gripe in public. I mean, Justin Thomas is one of them. We want more money. We are the reason the USGA has the budget because we play the US Open. We're the reason they have a $100 million per year TV contract because of the US Open. We want a bigger sliver of that pie. And that conversation had been going on. It just hadn't been organized to the point where they went to the tour and said, we're going to change this or we're going to leave. And they didn't have the we're going to leave part. Now they got that, and they could get what they wanted really quickly.
I've said for years that most all of life circles back around to a Seinfeld episode. And now I'm thinking of the one where Costanza he quits his job, but comes back the next day and pretends that he was kidding. Now I'm wondering if we're going to see some of those guys show up at an event and go, oh, you thought I was serious? That's crazy. Ryan Ballengee, can you define for all of us what the heck the PIP program is? It sounds like we're going to pay you to be retweeted a lot. And in this announcement, the PIP took on a very different scale of economy. So well, that seems like, of all of this, that seems like the pot of cash that is most slush fundy. I don't understand PIP. Do you?
Oh, it is absolutely a slush fund. It is. You have nailed it. It's called the Player Impact Program, and basically the idea is to identify what was formerly 10 is now suddenly 20 players who, quote unquote, move the needle the most. And in the initial year of that, guess who won? Tiger and Phil.
Go figure.
Guys who are not competitively relevant, at least in the current stage of professional golf, but they won a boatload of cash because when people went on the internet or watched golf, those were the two guys they cared about most. And that turned, interestingly, into a blueprint for Live to pick off the most publicly recognizable players. They had half the guys on the PIP top 10 from last year now in Live. And that was their punch list. And they went to Bryson and they went to Brooks and DJ and Bubba and nailed down all of them, at least half the list. And the tour said, okay, well, if you guys are the top guys, and we'll expand that to 20 because that makes more sense than 10 for official World Golf Rankings for promotional purposes, then you've got to agree to play together more often so we can go to sponsors and our television partners and media partners and say, we've got great fields half the season, guaranteed. And I think they realized, hey, if you're going to up the ante and include me in this program of slush money, then sure, I'll agree to play those particular events that, by the way, I was going to play anyhow. And you're going to give me money to participate? Sure, absolutely. Happy to do
it. So if I'm in the lower tier of players, I'm not the one that people would recognize walking down the street. I'm one of those guys that's, hey, I make cuts 40% of the times and I make more money than all of you, but you just don't know who I am. Am I impacted at all by this PIP stuff? Because I don't think I have a chance in being a player or a factor in that, in those measurables. I'm not moving any needles.
Yeah, I keep coming back to Jim Herman, who, when the PIP program came out, I mean, he's won a couple of times on tour.
Yeah,
Jim Herman
he's
could
funny.
wear a shirt that says "I'm Jim Herman, 2-time PGA Tour winner," and no one would walk up to him. And that's not a slam on Jim Herman.
Right.
He's just not a needle mover. But he's not going to get any of that PIP money because no one knows who he is. And interestingly enough, he went on Twitter and made light of the PIP campaign and just tried to get people aware of it and aware of him in the off chance maybe he could sneak in that top 10. And he's not going to sneak in the top 20 either.
No.
But I think the idea is of expanding this is that to go to players who are up and coming and say it's about more than just being good at golf to be recognized by the public. And yes, winning inside the ropes will make you crazy amounts of money, and maybe it'll be all you ever need and all you ever want. But if you want to be a superstar, you've got to do more than win and be good. You've got to acknowledge your fans. You've got to have a public presence. You have to work on behalf of your fellow players who we otherwise can't convince you to do because you are technically an independent contractor, so to speak. So this is our way of convincing you to be one of the fold. If we have the data that tells us you actually matter to our product's public image, we want you engaged. And if you don't, that's okay. You could still offer you millions of dollars inside the ropes money, but you're just not going to get any of the slush fund money.
Isn't it amazing that they're trying to quantify and reward what Arnold did every single day of his life without anybody telling him, because that's how he was raised? In other words, we're going to reward you to care about your product, to interact with your customers, to be gracious. And if you'll do that, here's a couple $1 million. I don't, that part is the most confusing aspect of it all. And there's a lot of confusing aspects to all of this. So we have these events on the calendar currently that wouldn't be in the categories we defined earlier, with the big time events, the elevated events. One of them would be the Rocket Mortgage Classic here in Detroit. So that's a hometown event. So I'll use that as my example. I'm not sure they know yet, so I certainly don't know yet if this is good news or bad news for them. I don't know if there's a rotating approach to elevating tournaments once every 3 or 4 years. This year's event was won by Tony Finau. That's a pretty good winner to have in a field that was decently strong because it was positioned on the calendar for the final push for some FedEx Cup points to get into the playoffs. Now, if it remains in that kind of time of year, then perhaps that takes care of some of the other issues. Although with all of the rule changes, I'm not sure what takes care of what anymore. Um, if you were, and it's so weird. You talk about catching strays. If you were the John Deere, the poor John Deere folks get used as the example in every discussion of tournaments that don't matter, and I feel bad for them. It's a good tournament.
It is very great.
But if you're in that category, are you gathering your committee together today and having kind of a panic attack?
I wouldn't necessarily, and I'll say that for two reasons. The first is one of the rule changes you kind of alluded to. Next year, the FedEx Cup playoffs are the top 70 in points. So 55 guys who got in this year wouldn't get in next year. So all of a sudden, the final push, as you mentioned, which is where this event, 3M, Wyndham, all fall, actually takes on a whole lot more importance because that $75 million bonus pool, that if you want access to the higher echelons of that, well, you've got to get into the top 70. And there were plenty of superstar players that were kind of lingering around that number. So all of a sudden, if you're the Rocket Mortgage, your pitch to players is, yeah, we don't have a $20 million purse, but if you don't go through us or 3M or Wyndham, you might not get access to that 75 million that you would like. So why don't you come here and play in our event? And I think that makes an interesting appeal for those events later on the schedule that kind of get lost in the fray from the gap between the Open Championship to the start of the playoffs. Now you've got a legitimate reason to invite them because 55 more guys aren't making the playoffs. So that I think that's one part of it. The other part of it is kind of reading between the lines, although this hasn't been codified specifically. It kind of sounds like Jay Monahan wants 3 or 4 events on the schedule to be elevated events that rotate.
Right.
So it's not going to always be the same dozen PGA Tour events plus the majors plus the players. It's going to have implications for the schedule. So some years, and maybe not every sponsor will agree to this, to put up the additional money or whatever for the additional exposure, but there are going to be opportunities for Rocket Mortgage to say, okay, well, we want to be an elevated event this year. We will put up the 20 million. Let's go. And maybe that happens with the Deer. I personally would love that. If the Deer said, we will put up the extra 13, $12 million, whatever it is, the gap to get to 20 million. So we can have the guaranteed 20 most impactful players on the tour. And by the way, probably every other superstar. That would be incredible. I think that would be transformative for the PGA Tour schedule if there are enough sponsors who are willing to do that, because a lot of communities have PGA Tour events, but don't necessarily get the opportunity to have that kind of field.
And I kind of wonder,
that's a big deal.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if the tour might supplement some of that for a small market like Moline, Illinois. They may have to, but I guess that remains to be seen. I'm thinking about ambassadors. We mentioned Arnold earlier, and he and Jack, did their thing. They came together. They built and saved what was the tour of that era with the famous meeting in Arnold's office where he just said, "This is not going to happen." What Greg Norman was trying to make happen then. Phil had a chance to be the Arnold of this current era, and instead, I'm comparing him to Wayne Player, not Gary. He's just kind of lost a lot of the love that was out there. However, I do agree with what Doug Barron told me on the range yesterday, and that is that a lot of these guys ought to be sending Phil a thank you note, because without all of this, that doesn't happen. Meanwhile, Tiger and Rory step into this role. I wasn't shocked by the pairing of the two of them because they have always seemed to have an appreciation for each other, and we have many examples of that. But I'm not understanding what they did on a sidebar here. All right, so they came in and they reshaped the tour culture, the tour economics. My guess is Tiger called Jay and said, "If you'll let me fix this, I'll fix it." And Jay's probably like, "Please do, because I have no idea what's happening." But at the same time, it sounded like Tiger and Rory went into the treehouse and came out with a new game involving stadiums and kind of a mixture of Top Golf, Holy Moly, and I don't know what, which is, it's another chapter of all of this that's probably getting the least amount of attention. That seems to be the strangest part of a very strange 48 hours. What are they doing?
So Tiger and Rory and former Golf Channel executive Mike McCarley have, among other ownership stakes, have formed this group called Tomorrow Sports, TMRW Sports. So we're removing just vowels from words now, calling them words. The G4ification of the language continues. And they decided their first concept of Tomorrow Sports, which is supposed to be kind of an infusion of technology and sports together, was to create effectively a simulator golf league called TGL. I assume that means Technology Golf League. No one has told me that, but I'm assuming that.
Tiger Golf League.
Or it could be Tiger Golf League. I mean, who knows? Whatever it is, it's TGL. And TGL is going to start in 2024. There are going to be 18 PGA Tour players involved. Not surprisingly, Tiger and Rory are two of them. They're going to be 6 teams of 3 players. And they're going to compete in 15 regular season events in these purpose-built arenas, maybe. I don't know.
You're building new structures for this?
That's what they say.
There's
so
no way.
But are they doing this in, all-state arena where they build that out and then people can sit around it? I don't know. Well, I guess that's very much to be determined. But they're going to basically play screen golf live on TV Monday nights for 2 hours. They say it'll be done in 2 hours. And in addition to the actual simulator component, there's going to be what they call a tech-infused short game area. So basically, depending on how the screen golf goes, when it comes time to actually putt and chip and hit sand shots, they'll do it in front of fans on a singular tech-infused green, whatever that actually means. And I've heard of a concept similar to this. It's called Next Links. I don't know if they're involved at all or whether that was kind of an inspiration. Who knows? I guess we'll find out about that in due course. But it sounds like the idea is to get this on TV, have some pretty decent money involved, and hope to draw an audience for golf that maybe would not otherwise be interested in watching 144 guys go hit a white ball around a big field. Instead, try to do it in a stadium of some kind. So it's very much, I mean, we just don't have enough of a grasp of this because there's no real concrete details beyond the concept and when they plan to start it. But
yeah,
I think the idea of Monday Night Golf probably will be intriguing to a lot of people who might be looking for an alternative from a bad Monday Night Football game, or depending on the season for this, the dog days of summer when no one gives a crap about their bad local MLB team.
Again, that's the least defined aspect of all the news that we've had dumped on us, but it's very interesting. And if I were cynical, which of course I'm not, but if I were a cynical guy, I would think that this was Tiger trying to find a way to still compete. Because now, no matter what venue you're playing this in, I don't care if it's the LA Coliseum or if you build a velodrome special dome thing, it's never going to require more than a wedge, right? So that seems like something that he would always be able to be a part of, unless you do incorporate the simulator stuff. Hey, in this visual age of CGI, green screen, and technology of simulators, I don't have any doubt that a visually compelling product can be put together. So I guess we'll all wait to see what the video game looks like. We've come a long way since my days with the Atari 2600, Ryan, I can tell you that. So, well, hey, man, this stuff's going to continue to unfold, and I appreciate your insight here as we just dig into the surface of it. My last question for you is, does this dump of news, do these developments make you more enthused about professional golf or not? And I'll interrupt myself by saying my love of the game is because I get to play the game and do it with my friends at an amateur level. So I've rarely defined my love of golf by what happens amongst the millionaires, but part of our profession is to cover what they're doing. So let me restate the question. What does this do for your enthusiasm about professional golf?
I think specific to the PGA Tour, I don't know that it changes it. I mean, as I kind of said earlier, this just codifies what we already knew to be true if you thought about it long enough. So on one hand, that's great that the players have finally agreed to come together at a group level at the upper echelon of the sport and finally say, we need to do something about ourselves and we're going to do it together. I think that part of it is very good. Does it matter to me as a tour fan? I don't know if it means all that much. I think there's been a lot of angst among golf fans, at least that I've seen this year, that all this stuff between the PGA Tour and Live has just made them focus more on the biggest events, the four majors, maybe the Players, maybe the Ryder Cup or President's Cup, depending on your year, and then everything else is kind of take it or leave it. I don't know that that's necessarily true, but it also can't hurt at the same time to have the best players that remain on the PGA Tour agree to get together half of the season and be in front of fans as a united front. That will make a better product overall, and hopefully that means that more opportunities are available down the pipe for the guys who are the rank and file, so to speak, for the guys who play the Corn Ferry Tour, who are trying to get to this level. But at the same time, it also creates another perhaps barrier to entry to get to that stage. And the only answer that Rory or any player will give them is play better. Well, I don't know that necessarily is the right answer,
Right.
but at least from the perspective of probably a casual fan, this is a big net win.
You know what I found interesting by its omission from all of this was any conversation about combined events or a similar pouring in of unfound cash to the LPGA. I found that interesting. Doesn't mean it isn't still forthcoming, but it didn't happen at a time when everybody was paying attention. And with rumors of Liv next coming after the ladies, one would wonder how far away we are from either an announcement like we just had with the tour or hands in the air saying, wish we could help. Sorry, ladies. But I
Yeah.
guess maybe a
I mean,
discussion.
between that, the DP World Tour as well. I mean, the strategic alliance. What does this mean for the DP World Tour? Because right now it sounds like another punch in the gut. It doesn't sound like a helping hand unless some of these three events that are rotating, 3 or 4 events that are rotating, turns out to be DP World Tour events. And if they're not, what are you going to do to support them when you're really not supporting them except with opposite field events and the Scottish Open?
And I keep thinking of more last questions for you. So here's one more last question, entering the category of just a barrage of last questions. This announcement would seem to me to provide the major championships with a little more strength to say to those who departed, sorry, you're out. Does the Masters do that to its former champions?
I don't foresee a scenario, even knowing that Chairman Fred Ridley is vehemently against Liv based on the legal filings of the Liv players that sued the PGA Tour. Even knowing that, I'm not convinced that he would say to former champions, you're not welcome at the Champions Dinner. You can't play in our tournament, because that is fundamentally the history of the Masters.
They uninvited Phil this
right
year.
And that's the other hand of evidence. So I guess I think Fred Ridley is probably trying to figure out right now, with all the changes to the official world golf ranking, with all of these guys who went to Live not getting points, is there a way he can exclude almost all of them except the former Masters champions without having to say anything? And if he can do that, he's probably going to do that. And then he can examine in 2023 how the Masters goes with these former champions that are now playing Live. And maybe he just kind of says to them privately, you know what? You want to come back here in 2024? Don't play Live. And he can keep it. He can kind of keep the blood off his hands, so to speak, of engineering a change without it ever seeming like he actually did anything to engineer change.
We don't know this answer yet. So the next time you and I connect, I'll ask you this question. Did Greg Norman win? I mean, it's literally.
That's a complicated answer.
Yes, it is. It's like a personal crusade. It's Don Quixote at the windmills for 4 decades, been trying to do something. And I'm curious to know whether or not he won. And maybe we don't know that yet. Maybe
Greg Norman in 1992 won. Greg Norman in 2022, I'm not sure that he does.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, Ryan, we'll leave it there. Thanks, man. Good stuff. Great analysis. And everybody can check out Ryan's thoughts, opinions, and coverage at golfnewsnet.com. And always good stuff coming from your part of the world. If you're ever home, would you ever just be home for a while?
This is the first day in several weeks, 3-4 weeks. So, and then I'm leaving again in 2 weeks. So, it's great to be in my own office for once.
Feels good to be back in a familiar setting and not somewhere where you have to use a magnetic key to enter. That's for sure. Thanks, bud. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.